The movie begins by showing us Garfield using his cell phone, and he is asking for food because he was hungry. Then he begins to say that he was going to tell his story, and his food is delivered to him via drone service. Garfield begins to tell us when he was a little kitten, and that he had been abandoned in a dark alley, in which we can see that he was scared and was smelling food from an Italian restaurant. Garfield goes running to get to the restaurant and was having trouble because he didn't know how to cross the street. While in the restaurant, John was sad because he was alone, and he notices that there was a kitten in the window. John opens the window to let the kitten in and ends up eating his pepperoni pizza. Then he hides the kitten from the waiter and asks for a lasagna because he was still hungry. But suddenly, we see that the kitten was eating on the customers' plates, and John starts looking for him to try to make him stop. A woman starts calling out to him to hand him his lasagna and then runs off to avoid being discovered. John tells the kitten that it was too interesting and that they were going to say goodbye and go on their way because pets are forbidden in his apartment. And we see that he starts to cry because he was going to be abandoned. John starts running to save it from the rushing water and changes his mind that he was going to keep it. Garfield starts to say that they moved into a house and one day decided that they were going to get another pet. We start to see that he was getting into a lot of mischief with his friend Audie and that he hated Mondays because they were going to the vet. We come back to the present and Garfield wakes up his owner to make him breakfast. Then they sit in the living room to watch TV and they are playing movies from some sort of Netflix. It gets dark and we see that Garfield was helping his owner John with as many things as he could. Garfield starts to say that he had a perfect life and he wouldn't have imagined the problems that would happen. Then he wakes up in the night because he was hungry and Audie starts helping him to get to the kitchen. But suddenly, we see that they had heard a noise and realized that strangers had entered their house. They begin to tell them that it is not good to eat at this time of night, and we see that they are caught to take them as prisoners. We go to an abandoned shopping mall and they begin to tie them up so they can't move. But suddenly we see that someone in disguise appears and cuts the ropes so they can escape. Garfield realizes that it was his father and begins to complain to him for abandoning him. While in the distance, they were being surrounded by the kitten Jinx, and she was responsible for them being kidnapped. She begins to tell them that she comes from the suburbs and that she had a big dream of becoming famous, but that she was rejected because she was nervous and had been found by her father's gang. Then one night, they decided that they would rob a farm, and that when she escaped, she ended up being caught. So she was taken to an animal prison, and one day, she managed to escape with her new friends. So she made the decision that she would have her revenge, and that she would use Garfield to reunite with Vic. Jinx begins to tell them that he has to steal the farm to forgive him for his betrayal, and that they would work as a team to complete the mission. The next morning, they begin to prepare to start the adventure, and Garfield was angry about his father's problems, because he still resented that he had abandoned him, and that they would stop seeing each other when they finished the mission. While in the house, John manages to notice that his pets were missing and was worried that they were in trouble. We return to the animals and see them board the train to start the mission. The father begins to think how he can defeat the villain and that he has to be careful so that his son is not hurt. Then he starts telling him that he has to take advantage of the trip because he can learn how to be a street cat. To which his son tells him that he is not interested and just wants to go back to sleep at home, while Odie was decorating the wagon for his friend to rest. But suddenly we see that it was full of spiders, and his father helps him so he doesn't get hurt. Then they jump off the train to continue their journey, and we see that in the distance they were being followed. We go to the farm where they would steal the milk, and were having some type of festival. The team starts to say that it seemed too easy, and they manage to realize that they were wrong. Garfield hits a tree to think of an idea, and manages to realize that there was the farm pet. Then he goes on his way to ask for his help, and we see Otto tell him to sing his song. We start to see that Garfield was singing the lactose song, and that the bull hits him to stop him from singing. Otto starts to remember that he was part of the farm, and that he was in love with his barnmate. They then approach the bull to try to cheer him up, and he starts telling them what happened. Otto begins to tell them that they changed owners, and that the new corporation had taken him out to pasture. So he made the decision that he would go back for his beloved, and that he was always being stopped in his attempts to save her. They begin to say that they can work as a team, and that they would get the milk while he frees his beloved. We start to see that they were figuring out how to infiltrate the farm, and that they have to be careful of the dangers of the place. While in the house, John was still worried about the disappearance of his pets. The next morning, they begin to prepare to start with the mission, and they are going to have a training to improve their skills, where we can see that they are being beaten because they were not ready, and the only one ready was Audie. Audie starts to tie them up so that they learn how to behave because they were failing in their teamwork. His father begins to tell him that when he was little, he only wanted to protect him and that he was having trouble getting food. So he made the decision that he would leave him in the alley while he got food, and that when he came back, he was missing. Then he realized that he was with a person and that he would no longer look for him so that he could have a better life. Garfield begins to apologize for the way he behaved because he was angry that he didn't know the truth. Afterwards, his friends say that they were ready and that they were going to prepare to start the mission. We go back to the mall, and the kitten was obsessed with getting her revenge. But suddenly we see that her assistants had arrived, and they say that everything is going as planned, because they plan to warn that they are going to rob the farm and thus get caught as part of the revenge. But suddenly we see that they weren't understanding them, and they tell their boss about the mysterious call. So she decides to use an app and deciphers the message that they were going to be robbed. The next morning, they begin to prepare to start the mission and use acorns as a communication system. Then they disguise themselves as backpacks to enter with the children and go to the electrical room so as not to be discovered. But suddenly we see that the workers were coming out and they manage to hide before being caught. The team continues their way through the air ducts and they manage to get to the place where the milk was. But suddenly we see that Garfield was in trouble and was being transported on the production line. Then he jumps into the cheeses to save himself, and we see that he was again on his way to a dangerous part. Audie uses some cheeses to save his friend, and they end up getting caught in some giant cutters. So his father decides he has to save them, and manages to get there in time to save them from the machine. The team continues on their way to get the key, and realize that they have been discovered. Otto begins to tell them that it was their enemy, and that he will make a distraction so they can get out. We start to see that they are fighting to defeat the guard, and that the father betrays them to get away. Then he gets into the vehicle to escape with the milk, and we see that the team ends up getting caught because of his betrayal. Otto begins to be attacked by the security guards, and we see that he runs away to avoid being caught, while the father had been stopped by Jinx and says she didn't expect him to complete the mission. We return to Garfield, and he is sad that he has been betrayed again by his father. Some cats start saying that his father also betrayed them, and that he was kicked out of the gang because he was untrustworthy. Because he always said he was going to visit his son, and only saw him from a tree outside his house. But suddenly we see that Audie was out of the cage, and John had arrived to take his pets. We go to John's house, and see that Garfield was happy that he was back. Garfield begins to remember the words of the cats, and realizes that his father did visit him. Garfield begins to say that his father did not betray them, and that he made that decision to bring them back home. We go to the mall, and the pets are reading that Jinx's real plan was to get his revenge. Garfield uses the acorn to communicate with the bull, and starts telling him that they need his help. While the father was as a prisoner in the train cars, and they plan to throw him to fall off the bridge, Garfield begins to prepare to save his father, and leaves at high speed to get to the train. We begin to see that they are on the run from the villain team, and were being helped by the drone service. Garfield starts attacking them to save his father, and we see that they jump off the train to be saved by his friend. But suddenly we see that the rope was too tight, and that ends up causing them to get caught again. His father starts to be thankful that he came back to save him, and we see that it causes the dogs to change their minds. So Jinx gets angry that she has been betrayed, and ends up pushing them off the train. Then they start holding onto each other to fall like a parachute, and the bull arrives in time to save them from falling. It gets dark, and we see that they decided that they would return the vehicle to get the cow. The guard begins to say that she had been ratted out, and would go back to jail for the trouble she caused. Otto was happy to meet his beloved, and that they were going to continue their love story. The next morning, they were on their way back to John's house, and began to say goodbye and move on with their lives. John was happy that his pets were back, and Garfield leaves the house to meet his father. Then he starts telling him that he can stay with them, and ends up being accepted as part of the family. As a last scene, they are happy that they are now together, and we see that they had a party for Garfield's birthday. This is how the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on what more movies you would like to see on the channel.